Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best-fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Okay. All right, very good. So thanks everybody for joining us on today's presentation of the benefits of moving to an ERP system that specializes in nonprofits. My name's Jim Scarf. I'll be doing the presentation today. I am with Express Information Systems. We are a software, cloud, and IT consulting firm based in San Antonio, Texas. We have been in business for 34 years. We've got a group of about 15 consultants, about 20 couple staff in total. And our average employee tenure is 17 years, which is fairly unusual for this industry. We work very hard to hang on to our consultants so that we can hang on to our clients and provide a continuous quality lifelong relationship. So what we're going to look at today is the changing role of nonprofit financial leaders. So we're going to start with our first question, which is, what is your top challenge as a nonprofit finance leader? Give you a second to answer that.
Jim, what have you found with all the people that you've talked to about the biggest challenges?
Reporting and manual processing, which is going to be what we're focusing on today, coincidentally. All right, so let's talk about our pain points here. Sage commissioned a survey in 2023. It found that 45% of financial leaders said that the manual time-consuming reporting process is the top challenge that they face. That's going to largely be what we're addressing today. In addition, they found that on the donor side, that 56% of donors would be more likely to give a gift again if they had better insights into the impact their donations are making. The ability to provide those insights, again, is limited by the ability to do reporting and capture the information with outdated reporting tools. Another survey by the CPA firm Armanino found that finance leaders would like to spend more of their time on strategic work and less of their time on day-to-day accounting activities. However, the time that they can spend on strategic activities is crowded out by the accounting role, which we don't have much room to control or take shortcuts on. So that leaves basically the leadership and the forward-looking strategy left to just the time that's remaining after we have completed our monthly accounting cycle. This leaves us trapped in the role that we're going to call Nonprofit Finance Leader 1.0. This leader is basically this is a role that documents the history of the company with precision, but only really makes predictions about the future. These predictions are often based on intuition and experience because they don't really have the data and tools to make more supportable decisions. When we add good, timely data to the equation, then we can make the transformation into the data-driven financial leader, or what we'll call finance leader 2.0. So the strategic leader that will drive the organization to new heights. They're a forward-looking strategist rather than a historian. So we're going to look at 3 areas today on how we can free up time and produce better information to become more strategic. We're going to look at implementing a modern GL and reporting tools to go with it so that you have the right data in a timely fashion to drive analysis. We're going to look at automating manual financial processes to free up more time. And then finally, providing real-time visibility to stakeholders throughout the organization so that everybody can be better informed and make better real-time decisions. So the first tool in this is a multi-dimensional general ledger, General Ledger 2.0. I've been doing ERP implementations for over 20 years now, and obviously much of that time was spent in the world of the segmented chart of accounts. So question number 2 is, how much time do you spend on month-end reporting?
We know your normal answer, Jim. It's too much, right?
Too much is the normal answer. All right, so the problem results, or the root cause of much of this, is the legacy chart of accounts. I'm sure many of you either have or certainly have seen a chart of accounts that looks something like this, where we have an account and then a dash and a location and maybe a department and then a project or a grant. But this is all one continuous string. So if, for example, I have an equipment account, and I need to track equipment across 3 locations, 5 departments, and 5 projects, that could take as many as 75 combinations of account 1500 in order to account for all possibilities. So many of you have experienced, you get a new grant, you add a new location, fund, project, and you have to clone a large segment of your P&L range in particular in order to account for this new segment. This is extremely painful. It causes difficulties in data entry. It's largely responsible for extremely slow report performance. It's just, and it really limits our ability to do reporting, because any reporting tool you're using, you have to try to break this single piece of text back out into multiple values. Various systems have varying levels of success and flexibility in doing that. So in a modern chart of accounts, we dispense with the segmentation approach and have a chart of accounts that has no segments. So we would take your current natural or main segment and convert that to a chart of accounts with no segments, where each value appears only once. So salaries are salaries are salaries. We don't have numerous iterations of salaries to match up with various accounts, departments, and such. Okay, so that begs the obvious question, well, what about all of the rest of my reporting requirements, such as departments, locations, funds? There we have a separate field for each of these. So rather than segments, each of these is a separate data field so that we can much more easily parse the who, the where, the what. Examples would be customers, vendors, employees. Those would be standard across all applications. Then from there, you define your own dimensions, whatever you need, typically locations, departments, grants, funds, projects, whatever you need. Define as many or as few as you need to meet your mission. Now, if you're using this many, you may be working too hard, but when we combine the two, the natural chart of accounts with these dimensions, we get a much shorter, easier chart of accounts to manage. It's much easier for the users to use, and it opens up a lot of opportunities for improved reporting. In practice, this is what it looks like. During data entry, this is a journal entry, but this would permeate through all of your data entry screens, AP, AR, whatever. You would obviously select your account, and then you would choose the dimensions that you decide you're going to use, such as fund, department, vendor, and such. You can rearrange this in any order you want, and it makes for much better data entry, much easier data entry. So let's take a look at some traditional reporting versus a more modern approach to reporting capabilities. So here is a report that would be generated off of a traditional chart of accounts. So typically your rows are defined by account numbers and your columns are defined by time. Now you may have actual budget and comparisons of actual to budget variances as such, but the columns tend to be based on time. A lot of systems will allow you to get other single segments into columns, but it tends to be a lot of work to get that done. All right, so what if I want to know where in my organization these payroll expenses are coming from, and who am I spending my program expenses with? So our next slide is going to be the same report expanded. So here we've got, again, the same report, but I've told the locations that I've told the columns that it's still based on the date of 12/31/2021, but I've told it to expand by locations. So I've only defined one column. So if I add locations, new locations will dynamically appear in my reports without me having to edit the report. Okay. Now my rows are still the same rows. They're defined by accounts. The first item that we were interested in was the personnel expenses. So we've got personnel expenses, which is still defined by an account, but I've told that line to expand by departments. So what we see here are actually, rather than individual departments, these are actually groups of departments. So I've got a group of departments that fall into fundraising, another that falls into management in general, and another that fall into program expenses, which you'll recognize as being your 990 categories. All right, once we get down to professional fees and such, we're back to just a normal account. Those are the same as they were on the previous account. But on my program expenses now, I've told that account, that line, that I want that to expand by vendor. So here I can see my expenses by vendors. Okay, this expansion is very handy, but we can also pivot in any direction that we need to. So here's an example of where we have pivoted the data so that these rows, the rows in this report, are now individual project dimension, or this could be grant, it could be customer, it could be vendor, it could be any of my dimensions, but I've got one row here per member of that dimension. And then my columns are defined not by time. The entire report is filtered to a specific date, but my columns are defined by account numbers. So you can see here I've got accounts receivable, various revenue columns. I've actually got a statistical column of the hours that were worked, labor costs and such, and then a net or gross profit out to the far right. So we can pivot in pretty much any direction. Another application of the dimension approach is easy filtering. So here we see 3 different reports that are on a single grant, grant 401B. So this is an example of something that I often do to support the process for folks, human services and fee-for-service type organizations that have to, bill for their reimbursement of their expenses. We try to create a report that produces all of the information that they need to fill out those reports in a single view. So in this particular case, we've got actual versus budget. We've got some functional expenses with commitments. So for example, we've got actuals and then committed costs, which are coming off of purchase orders so that we can really see what our total commitments against budget are. And then general ledger detail to support it. So all of the information the person needs hopefully in one point, in one window. Now, obviously different funders have different summary requirements, but we try very hard to build the reports up front so that each month end isn't a massive export GL detail to Excel to do the required summarization. So once we have these reports, we should be able to simply select my next grant and have all of the reports refocus on that one project. So you can see now we're on project 141. And by the way, all of these reports are drillable. In our next presentation, we'll be doing a more live demonstration of some of these features, and I'll be showing how you can drill down to the various levels of detail down to the transactions and attachments and such. So we have a great deal of ability to streamline the reporting process. Again, the other thing is that these reports are all in real time. So somebody posts an entry, it'll appear in these reports immediately. There's no closing of modules required or anything like that. All right, let's move from reporting into the next area. Remember our slide that showed that our accounting tasks are basically crowding out all of our time and not giving us the ability to do strategic type work. So the solution there is to automate financial operations as much as possible. And if you've been on the same system for a number of years, there are a lot of ways to streamline things that didn't exist 5, 6, 7 years ago. So a few of those that we're going to look at today are AP automation, briefly payments and approvals. For those of you who are doing month-end allocations, that process can be greatly automated, as can the releasing of restricted funds if you do that on a monthly basis. Then we'll talk about eliminating manual integrations in favor of direct connections between applications. Payroll being the prime example. All right. One more question. How much time do you think your team spends processing a single AP invoice? Give you a minute on that, or a moment. All right, a survey from IDC, who's a leading research company, found the following statistics in the AP process. And this AP automation is really where the low-hanging fruit is on saving time in your process. There's a lot of players in this space. There's a lot of opportunities, and we see tremendous amount of activity in this area. So IDC found that it takes 9 to 24 minutes per invoice. I'm assuming that includes the entire cycle from capture to payment. 34% of the time is spent on actually just getting the invoice into the system, data entry. 12% of time is spent on actually processing the payment, And in a typical medium-sized organization, the AP function is taking up 70% of a full-time employee. So what is AP automation? Y'all have all heard of some of them. I assume you've probably heard of the most popular or what best known solution is Bill.com. There are numerous others used, a lot of players in this field, as well as functionality built into various ERP systems. So the way all of the common features that all of these systems have is that they provide you with an email box that your vendors can send email their invoices as attachments or as the body of the invoice of the email directly into a mailbox. The accounting team, if they receive the email, can simply forward that email into the box, and the system will capture it from the email box, or they can directly upload an image if they have it. The system then digitizes the image and performs optical character recognition to fish out the vendor, the invoice number, the dates, the amounts, and such, and as well as how it should be coded. It's then presented to a user for review. These systems use AI. No presentation is complete without working in the term AI. So we're using AI here to learn each vendor's invoice. So in your initial passes, these systems may not do all that well on figuring out where a PO number is or segregating the due date from the invoice date and such. But your user will coax it along and tell it where on the invoice each of these elements are. And then going forward, the next time we see an invoice from that vendor, the system will know where each of those data, the position of each of these data elements should be, and it will do a much better job of completely filling out the document. Some systems will, even if it completely fills out the document, send the item directly for approval or directly into the system without any user intervention. And then typically we want to route the invoice for approval before it posts into the accounting system. Then what's typically a separate add-on functionality is the ability to process the payment for you, to pay by virtual card, credit card, ACH, or have an outside party print the check for you and mail it so that you don't have to do all of that handling. So this is the big area for streamlining. So some of the things that you consider if you're looking at AP automation is a native solution such as the one in Sage Intacct sufficient, or do you need to go to a third-party solution? Third-party solutions tend to be more robust because they've been in the marketplace a long time. Important consideration is, where are the images stored? Are they stored in the ERP system, or are they only stored in the AP automation solution? So for example, Bill.com is certainly the most widely used system and is frequently the low cost solution, but the images are stored only in Bill.com. If you drop that service to either bring it in-house or pick up another service, you lose your images. So where the image is stored is an important item to consider. How robust is the approval routing process? Not all are created equal. Before you go shopping or system evaluating, you need to have a good outline of what your approval process needs to be. And then finally, for some situations where you're using encumbrance or commitment accounting or otherwise using purchase orders, most systems do not integrate with purchase orders. So if you've issued a purchase order in your accounting system and you get a bill in to a solution, I'm going to pick on Bill.com again, fine solution, but it won't recognize that you've got a PO and convert that PO. So we do have preferred solutions that will pick up and process invoices against purchase orders if you were using that functionality. Brief word now, we're moving on from AP automation, and this applies to any system. As a longtime consultant, I am really surprised at two things that I still see. One is, as we pick up new clients, often from QuickBooks, but in many systems, I can't believe the number of situations where somebody in AP is selecting the items that they want to pay, printing a report, and then taking that to somebody to circle or highlight or otherwise do the final decision on what we should actually pay this week. That needs to be an online process. AP should select the items, someone else should go in, an approver, if desired, should go in and mark the items as either approved or not, and then the processing should proceed. The other thing that constantly amazes me is the low adoption rate of paying your vendors by ACH. Even very old, there's many very old systems that will process and create ACH files for you. You typically go through the same check run process, and at the end, instead of having checks, you have a file upload to your bank. That can be an enormous time saver, and again, often exists in the system you already have. All right, the next area that we can automate, if you're doing month-end allocations. So we're talking here about not individual transaction by transaction allocation. That's a pretty standard feature. What we're talking about here is you're collecting numbers in one set of accounts during the course of the month, and then allocating them across typically grants or funds based on a various parameter at the end of the month. If this is taking up a lot of your time, that can very well and very easily be automated. It should be a predefined batch process that allows you to do your reporting. It should preserve your reporting capabilities both before and after the allocation. A lot of times allocations, while they're required for funding commitments, funding reimbursements, they skew your actuals. So you should be able to report before or after. And then you should be able to roll back the allocation if there's an error in the configuration or if additional expenses show up that need to be allocated. So a couple of examples of how this would work would be, this is the typical example. So here my first column is salaries. My second two columns are fringe benefits, one before and one after. So during the course of the month, we've been charging salaries into our 4 departments, counseling services through outreach. But we've been charging all of our fringe benefits, the 8,000, into a shared services department. Then our month-end process is to allocate the fringe benefits out to the departments based on their relative share of salaries. So the gist of it is we're taking one balance, spreading it across other balances based on the balances in a third set of account dimension combinations. Another example is to use numbers like headcount or fixed percentage. So here we have financial numbers in the first section, dues and subscriptions. And in the lower section, we have our basis for our allocations, which are statistical accounts. Statistical accounts, unit accounts, different systems call them different things, but they're non-financial numbers that we update each month. In this case, headcount. So in this scenario, our source is dues and subscriptions coded into counseling services, the 3,000. Our target process is to reallocate these numbers based on headcount. And you can see after the allocation, each of my departments has the same proportion of the dues and subscription expense that they had in the headcount. All right, another process that can be extremely painful if you have to do it, and that is releasing restricted funds month by month. A lot of people, a lot of organizations don't have to do this till year end, and they leave it to their CPA firms to do it. But if you're doing it on a monthly basis, you are probably spending a lot of time at it. So this should also be a predefined process based on the expenses charged into the fund or grant for the period. So let's walk through a scenario of what that would look like. So this is a general ledger showing the initial restricted funding. We received $100,000 for grant number 888, the Alamo Area Grant. You can see it's coded to account 4115, but I've got dimension 888 or project number 888 to represent the grant. But I've also got a restriction dimension. So this $100,000 credit to revenue is going into the system as temporarily restricted. And then during the course of the month, I start spending down that money. So here's the same revenue entry, but we've added legal fees and program expenses that have come through accounts payable. You can see that they've been coded to grant 888. The vendor happens to be Adams and Frost and ABC Office Supplies. And the restriction defaults in as unrestricted. But the key here is that they are coded to project 888. So what we need now is to release $38,925 and reclass that from restricted to unrestricted funds. This typically involves running general ledgers, potentially taking them out to Excel to identify the expenses that were spent against that grant. Wouldn't it be nice if the system would just do that for us? Well, in Sage Intacct, we have a process where it does exactly that. We define what constitutes a grant or pool of funds that is restricted, what the restriction is, and the date range. And then we run a batch process that generates these entries. So all the rest of these entries are the same as the previous slide, but we're still in the revenue area, but what we're doing is we are debiting restricted revenue and crediting unrestricted revenue in a single click, literally. Now we can properly report our restricted fund balances as 100,000 in total revenue for this grant, but 61 restricted, 39 unrestricted now. Okay. Our final area of time savings gets us to integrations. Payroll is typical. Most everybody who isn't doing payroll in their ERP system is using someone like ADP, Paycom, Paychex, etc. to do their payroll. And this involves an export out of the payroll system and importing that data into the general ledger. This can also, we may also have manual imports from donor systems, from expense tracking systems, or whatever other systems we might be using. So Intacct has an extremely robust API. For you non-technical folks, that's application programming interface. That is the language and structure that the vendor provides to allow you to access data. So different companies, different accounting system vendors have different approaches toward allowing you to get data in and out. some vendors try to provide the entire suite of applications. They want to provide payroll, CRM, budgeting, expense tracking. So they don't have necessarily particularly strong APIs because they want you using their system. Intacct has taken what they call a best-in-class system, where they have worked very hard to make their API as public and easy to use as possible. So what they've done is their mission is to create the best possible core financial system: general ledger, AR, AP, order entry, purchase orders, sort of the core stuff, cash management and bank recs. But things like ERP, CRM rather, donor management, payroll, that's been done. It's been done well, and it's been done over and over again. So the Sage philosophy is, we're not going to reinvent the payroll wheel, for example. You go choose the best possible payroll system, and we will make it as easy as possible to integrate. So all of these solutions and many more have direct connections into Sage Intacct, to where, in the case of payroll, it's typically not real time. You typically run a payroll. When you're finished with it in, for example, ADP or Paycom, you go in and you click a button and it will directly insert the payroll entry into Intacct. With things like donor management or CRM or expense type things, that might be a more near real time. Often with CRM type solutions, it is a fully automated process where nobody ever pushes things. In other areas, such as expense reporting, Expensify, Concur, Nixonia, and such, you typically finalize and review things in that system and then push a button to release a batch in. But I don't know if you've heard of Gartner. They're probably the single best known evaluator of technologies. We pulled a quote from them: "Postmodern ERP represents a fundamental shift away from the single vendor mega suite approach." Again, those who try to be all things to all people typically don't do all things well. Some things well, certainly, but not all things well. All right. So now we get to the final step here, which is just going to take a couple more minutes. And that is, so I've streamlined my capabilities, my operations. Now I've got this great reporting, but how do I distribute it organizational wide in real time? So how much time do you spend each month distributing reports and responding to ad hoc requests for information? I'll let you answer that real quick.
I know
I'm sure
with your
it's
implementations, Jim, this is your biggest pain point.
frequently, yes. How often have you asked yourself, there's got to be a better way to distribute this data? Or your users are probably also asking themselves, there's got to be a better way to get this data. Well, gaining real-time visibility with web-based dashboards are the key to this. So in a true cloud system such as Sage Intacct, it's entirely browser-based. All you need is a browser and an internet connection. So you can access the system certainly on your laptop, but on a tablet or even on your phone. Now, you certainly wouldn't want to do data entry on your phone, but you may certainly want to see critical reports. So what we do is generate typically role-based or function-based collections of reports and put them on a dashboard. So dashboards are really nothing but a collection of information that was created elsewhere. So imagine you or your stakeholders could log into the system and in your initial landing page see all of the critical information you need to do your decision making. In this particular case, you can see kind of in the upper left, this is a role-based dashboard for the CFO, where we're giving him key metrics, program financials, actual versus budget, which is often really key, not so much to the CFO, but to individual program managers if you've got very strong budgetary constraints on your funding. Graphs that are drillable. Again, all of these reports are drillable. Another example would be a different audience would be a grant manager who needs information on CFA awards and positions on grants and so on and so forth. We supply a list we call the nonprofit board book, which is a large suite of graphs and key indicators specifically for nonprofits. Outcomes. We talked earlier about how donors would like to see the impacts of their contributions. Here's the kind of information that we can generate using statistical accounts paired up with various donor information. And finally, we started out talking about the desire and need to shift toward a strategic analytical role rather than a documenter of history. So we have built-in visualization and predictive analytics as well. So a couple of examples here. We have got revenue trends and revenue sources broken out. Oops, went the wrong way there. These tools encompass the ability to do trend lines, clusters, forecasting, identify outliers and such, and do true analytical projections that are based on hard data. So these are all reasons why nonprofits love Sage Intacct. Makes it easy to manage and track funds and grants, increased visibility, improve productivity by automating manual processes, and it's a really user-friendly and quick to implement application compared to most legacy systems. We don't have the kind of problems getting these systems deployed that we've had with the older systems. One of the key areas in evaluating ERP systems is not just the functionality of the system, but also the satisfaction that the customers have. Sage is a leader in customer satisfaction. If you go to Trust Radius or G2 Crowd, Stacy can give you pointers to this information, but Intacct's got the very highest rating in the industry and has had for at least the last 7 years as customer satisfaction with the final solution and implementation. In addition, Intacct is the preferred provider of both the AICPA and the IFAC, International Federation of Accountants. So I hope you found that informative. Do we have any questions?
That was great, Jim. Lots of information. Really appreciated that. That was a lot of great detail, especially for nonprofits that are trying to make things more automated and more efficient.
Great, thank you.
I don't see any questions, so we can move on to the next slide. And so this is our contact information. If you want to reach out to us, you can explore our website, which is expressinfo.com. You can obviously reach out to myself or Jim personally if you have any direct questions, or anybody in your organization has direct questions. Please feel free to email us. And of course, always feel free to call us. We're happy to talk at any time about anything we discussed or anything else related to nonprofit and ERP. We're just happy to be a consultant, guide you through, answer any questions. and happy to do any of that. Final slide, Jem. This is what next in the series. This was our first webinar in the series about nonprofits and ERP. Our next one will be actually a product tour. Jim will go into and delve into how things actually work and dig down and show reporting capabilities and really allow you to see the lifeblood of what Sage Intacct and how it benefits nonprofits specifically. So that's a really great demo. And then following number 3 session will be a comparison between Dynamics 365 Business Central and Sage Intacct for nonprofits, kind of doing a compare and contrast over how one benefits the other, specifically related to nonprofits. And that's all we have today.